And I used to think to myself, there has got to be more than this. And if her Judaism doesn't help her, then what is there for me? And as I sit looking at Jesus, I'm thinking to myself, that's it. He is the bridge. As I looked at his arms outstretched on the cross, I thought, this is where I have come from my Jewish background, and this is where I want to go to follow him with all my life and all my heart.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbert with Inspired. Great to be back for another fantastic week of storytelling, of listening to another friend and what they've been up to in the world. Listen, if you're new to us, I think we've all just had enough being relentlessly bombarded by negativity in the press. It just makes you cynical and depressed and anxious. And what we need is dollops of good news. And we need inspiration. And I've got no doubt this week you're going to be inspired because we've got with us the wonderful Michele Guinness. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you, Simon. It's lovely to be with you.
It's so good to have you. So you're in France right now. I just want to say that my late mother-in-law would have so loved to be listening to this because she is the one that got me into your writings. She dragged me along, I think it was in about 2002 at New Wine, to a seminar. She said, you've got to come to listen to Michele Guinness. And so I think I read Chosen, your book Chosen, and The Heavenly Party. You've written a load of books, also friends with your daughter Abby, and she's got me into Spring Harvest, doing some talks there, and you were in the media, the National Health Service, as well as being a prolific writer. So listen, that's just teeing you up in a sense, but you were brought up in a practicing Jewish family. You end up marrying a vicar. Go on, tell us how that happened.
I felt always, I think, that there was something missing in my life. I mean, I loved the Jewish celebrations and festivals, but they were a pain to my mother because, bless her heart, she suffered from OCPD. Now, that's OCD. Right. But people with OCD, they would like to be rid of it, and they often work hard to be rid of it. If you've got the P in the middle, it means you are right and everybody else is wrong, and it's their problem if they mess up your routines and mess up your life.
What does the P stand for?
Personality.
Right.
It's a real personality issue. How she developed that, I've no idea. She was engaged at 17, married at 19, just after the war. And I suspect she took on this vast house in a little pit town in Gateshead. And I suspect it was all too much for her. She said that she had a housekeeper who was like Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca and was a bully. Mm-hmm. And she became obsessed with having a bigger and better house than everybody else. And her children had to be perfect. We were in our dressing gowns every night by 7 o'clock. And that was until I was 17 and went away to uni. Wow. I mean, our lives were so limited. And I used to watch her straightening curtains and, putting settees into the casters and straightening pictures. And she would spend all day doing that. And I used to think to myself, there has got to be more than this. And if her Judaism doesn't help her, then what is there for me? And in the sixth form at school, there were a group of girls who were all going to the same church. And they said to me, you've got to come along. But I was sent to a Jewish youth club on Sunday nights, would you believe? And I was able to say to my parents, I'm just going a little early to the youth club tonight. And so I could escape and try the church out. And my first experience, I couldn't tell my parents where I was going. So I'm all dressed up for a disco at the Jewish Youth Club where I'm supposed to find a really good catch, according to my mother. I've got to find a really good Jewish boy who comes from a decent family and is fairly well off and all the rest of it. So huge pressure going to this youth club. I'm all dressed up to the nines. I've got a little sort of glitzy number on and a PVC coat. Mary Quant that barely covers my backside, and I've got the panda eyes, the black eyeliner and white lipstick, and I think I'm really it. And I walk into this church for the evening service, and they all look at me like I'm a pork sausage at a bar mitzvah. What is this that's walked in? And then you're handed a sort of portable library, the service order and the hymn book and the notice sheet and goodness knows what else. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I've never knelt in my life. I mean, we don't kneel in Judaism. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, oh, I don't belong here. And then just as the service ended, one of the friends yanked me off to drink the most awful coffee I've ever tasted in my life. And it was the youth club. But I loved the youth club. We began talking about all sorts of issues that I was interested in. I was interested in the world, and my parents never talked about it, and never seemed to engage with that. Our lives were so limited, despite being Jewish. And I started to think, what is this Christianity thing all about? I don't think I can cope with church. But I became fascinated by Jesus. And somebody gave me a copy of Invitation to Live, which was a little booklet that introduced you to John's Gospel. And as I read about this man, there was no hypocrisy in that life. My parents were always getting round the Jewish rules. You're not supposed to drive to the synagogue on a Sabbath, and of course they did, and all the Jews did. There was no hypocrisy there. And gradually, as I read more and more about him, I thought, my goodness me, either this man is a total charlatan because he says he's God, or he is who he says he is, the Messiah of our people. But why don't they believe in him then? He is totally amazing. And I couldn't see how I could bring the two together. My first experience of Jesus was watching the film Ben-Hur. Mm-hmm. And you don't see his face at the beginning. You just see his impact on everybody else. And I thought, this man's utterly amazing. And then come the crucifixion, you see him. And at the very end, he's hanging on the cross and his blood starts to flow through Jerusalem in a fantastic storm. And his mother and sister are sheltering in a cave. They have leprosy and they are healed. And there's this amazing moment. And I thought, wow. And I started to have a little, and my mother dug me with her elbow in the ribs and she said, Jewish girls don't cry at this bit. And she dragged me out, more or less. That was my introduction. Then the next thing had happened later, as I'd been studying John's Gospel, went to the York Mystery Plays with the school on a school trip. And then there's a moment where Jesus is hung on the cross and the echo of the nails that are driven into him. It's horrendous. It goes right across the grounds where you are and it echoes and it's pretty awful. And the cross goes up and he's nailed to the cross. And as I sit looking at him there, I'm thinking to myself, that's it. He is the bridge. He, as I looked at his arms outstretched on the cross, I thought, this is where I have come from my Jewish background, and this is where I want to go to follow him with all my life and all my heart. And it all clicked into place. And the next morning we're sitting in our B&B, these girls, and I said, they were talking about faith, and some of them were saying they didn't want it. Some of them I knew did, were Christians. And I said, well, it's all right for you. I'm nothing now. And the Christian girls looked at me and said, you've become a Christian. And I said, look at me nose. I can't become a Christian. How does a Jew become a Christian? And that was the start, really, of a very long journey with my parents and with the Jewish community and my family, of trying to work out how to love them and how to honour them, and yet at the same time really follow Jesus, really let him take charge of my life. But it was wonderful too, because I knew I was not like my mother. I've just started writing a book called Saved from Turning into My Mother. I wasn't going to be her. There was celebration, there was light, there was life, there was freedom. Everything I had asked for, I had it there in my hands, except my parents hated every minute of it. And so I went off to university, where they kept ringing me up. They arranged for me to see a rabbi, to have classes, to learn where I'd gone wrong. I wasn't allowed to go out with non-Jewish boys. They asked me not to, and I said I'd honour them in that. I wasn't to go to church. Well, I said, yes, I can do that, because I didn't enjoy church awfully. It was such a culture shock for me. But we had wonderful Christian groups within the university, and I just grew and learnt and watched these older Christians and learnt from them and decided, how was I going to be a disciple? And then at the end of those 4 years, I knew I had to be baptised. I said, I will honour you, I won't be baptised. And at 21, I thought, that's it, I've got to go for it. So the minister said, I told him I wanted to be baptized. I'd started going to church at that point, after 3 years of not. And he said, have you told them? I said, no. And he said, here's the key to the vestry, go and ring them. So I went into the vestry, picked up the phone and told them, and they said, never come home again. You're no longer our daughter.
Wow.
And put the phone down. When I looked down and there were blobs of mascara all over the minister's blotter. I remember that. I cried so much. And came out and said, fine, we're going ahead. And it was a hard time because I was at the end of my degree. I had no job. I had no money. My flat had been taken over and was no longer available, so I had nowhere to live. And I said to God, what am I going to do now? I've nothing. And I said, and what's more, you won't even give me the man I love. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a while. And I was bereft of everything. I felt I had nothing. But when I looked back to that time, it was the realization that though I had nothing, I had everything. And it was one of the best times in my life where I've depended completely on God. And a job turned up for me doing detached youth work in Manchester city centre. Some friends of mine said, you can have the sitting room in our flat just for a few months till you get settled. But in fact, it lasted 4 years. And they just loved me. And it was an extraordinary 4 years. So, Peter, how did I get married to a vicar?
Yeah, go on.
So I'm in love with this guy who just doesn't love me, basically. We're friends. We're good friends. I just admired him enormously. I'd always said, Lord, if I marry, whoever I marry, I want him to be someone who can teach me, someone who is more in love with you than I am and can help me go further. And I saw this guy and he was, he was so spiritual and godly. And all the girls said, don't bother, he's way above all of us. And for 2 years, I kind of hoped and wished and nothing happened. Meanwhile, I'm doing this youth work on the streets of Manchester, which was extraordinary. I worked with a man called Frank White, who had just become a Christian and was trying to give up smoking and fish fingers because that was his entire diet. And I think I helped him a lot with his faith, but he helped me enormously. I was so sheltered, and he introduced me to more left-wing views and helped me to understand why these kids we were working with had nothing, why they ended up in prison, why they were messed about by every agency. And I grew to love these kids and began to learn the importance of just loving them and listening to them. And so I learned that from him. And I also learned from him that women can be equal to men in the workplace. He taught me that too. He got ordained eventually, which was amazing because he was so far from anything you'd ever imagine a bishop. Wonderful, wonderful guy, retired now. So all of those things were provided, but not the man. After 2 years of really hurting, I said, right, God, I'm going to tell him. Maybe it's just he's so spiritual, he doesn't realise how much I'm in love with him. So I said, he was living in a block of student accommodation. I said, if I'm meant to speak to him, let him be in this afternoon. So I walk round there, walk into the building, the lift doors open, and there he is standing there. I said, have you got a minute? And he said, yes. We went back up to his room. And I told him, I said, I've just loved you for the last 2 years and I feel you're the right man for me. Just straight away.
Go for it.
And he said, well, I'm really sorry about that, but I don't love you. I love you as a friend, but I'm not in love with you. And I have no indication you're the right woman for me. The extraordinary thing was that when I'd done my year in France, done a French degree, I did a year in France, I asked one evening if I will translate in the evening service, because there's an English boy coming and he's going to tell the story of what happened to his school. It's a boys' public school. And he tells the story of how he and another friend, they take a list of all the names of all the boys in the school and they pray all night for all these boys by name. And the next morning, as they're going back to get ready to go into school, they meet this young man on the stairs carrying a Bible. And they said to him, what are you doing? And he said, I don't know. I've just got this yen to read Luke's gospel. I don't know why. And he turned to me and he said, you must know him. He's at Manchester University with you. His name's Peter. And I kind of at that stage vaguely remembered a nice smile and a pair of lovely brown eyes. And no more than that. But when I got back to Manchester to do my final year, I'd gone to see him. And first thing he said to me was, I really look forward to you coming back, because I need to tell you, my family have been engaged in Jewish Christian relationships for generations. In fact, he said, all my life, all my friends when I was a boy were Jewish. So that's how our friendship developed from that one occasion in France. And so 2 years later, he's not interested. And I did say to God, he's got the love for Jewish people. He speaks fluent French because he was raised in Geneva. If he's not the right man for me, you've got a problem on your hands finding me somebody else. So another 2 years go by and there's still no sign of anything. And in fact, he tries not to see me because he knows it hurts me. And all I've got's a Sunday morning where I can peep at him over my hymn book. And one night the minister said to me, look, I want to talk to you. He said, it is no good you going around mooning like a lovesick camel. He said, you've got to go. You've got to leave Manchester. You've got to get out of here. Otherwise, you're going to have no life. You can't live like that. And I mean, I built a pretend altar in my little room, in the sitting room I was living in. And I'd said, Lord, I'm like Abraham with Isaac. I'm going to give him up to you. And if I see him go down the aisle with somebody else, I'll rejoice for him. And that went on for, 4 years, really. And this guy said, it can't go on. You're wasting your life. Let's have a pact with God. If there's nothing by Christmas, this was September, if he doesn't budge by Christmas, you will leave Manchester and you'll get a job somewhere else. And I said, I have to give up all my friends and my work and everything. And he said, you must do it. If you want to live for Christ, you must live properly, not this world where you're always hurting. So I said, okay, I give in. I was scared stiff. I didn't know what was going to happen. So this is September, and I'm going to have to pick it up from Peter's point of view. He tells it better. But he said it was October half term. He was teaching, and he wanted a whole morning with God just to pray and meditate and praise and think. And he said he's halfway through, and he hears this voice in his head say loudly, Peter, don't you think it's time you got married? And he said, well, that sounds very nice, Lord, but I'm not in love with anybody. Who do I marry? And he heard the voice say, Michele.
Wow.
And he said, well, I don't love her, so I'm going to just put it on one side for the time being. And he said that for the next 2 weeks, it got to the point where he couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, he couldn't think. He was so madly in love.
Wow.
Without seeing
me.
He hadn't seen me for months. Not properly, not to talk to. I think I said to God, Lord, if he falls in love with me, I'll never doubt miracles again. So that he didn't tell me. He rang me in November, bearing in mind it's Christmas is the time we've set, the minister and I. Mm-hmm. He rings me at the end of November eventually and says, would you like to go out for a meal with me? And I knew this guy. I knew he didn't spend money unless it was something really wanted to do. And my two flatmates came out. They sort of heard what was going on and came out from their respective rooms and were going, wah, wah. And I put the phone down and I told them what had happened. And they went, yeah. So the date he gave me was the 23rd of December.
Wow. 2 days.
2 days to go. And first date, and he proposed. And we were married 7 months later.
What a nuts story, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Fantastic. Oh, love that.
And what was so special was my parents had had so much to put up with from me. Really, I saw it. I saw how hurt they were. And I knew that if I married out, that would be the ultimate. And I was so frightened. And in the February after Christmas, we got engaged already. I went home to tell them. And my mother was furious. My father, though, was very thoughtful, and he said to me afterwards, do you know, I had planned this weekend to say to you, if there's a non-Jewish boy you love, I'll be here long after you're gone. You marry him. So he had been prepared, my father too, to release me, to be able to believe that they were going to cope with it.
Mm. And so you marry into Peter's the youngest surviving great-great-grandson of Arthur Guinness, the first brewer. Yeah. So you're marrying into a family steeped in beautiful history.
Yes. And I didn't know that. I had no idea until our honeymoon. And we went out to Ibiza where his parents were living. And up in his father's loft, it was a wonderful place. It was his study, and it smelt of must and age. And on the shelves were all these old Guinness biographies and great trunks of letters. And I sat there really for the whole 2 weeks just reading these stories and realised that Peter had come from an extraordinary line of missionaries and ministers who'd gone all over the world. I suppose there and then I realised that was it. He was going to either be a missionary or be ordained, one of the two. Mm-hmm. He hadn't been an Anglican, neither of us were at that time, so it was a bit of a shock to my system when he eventually, after a couple of years, came home and announced that he'd always felt in his guts that's what he was going to do, and he felt called. He said the big surprise was that it was the Church of England, because he said, I don't want to wear the medieval angel kit, all the robes and everything. Yeah. And I said, I don't want to be a vicar's wife, stuck with purple crimpline all the time. So we went back, told the parents. First told them, obviously, they knew I was marrying into the Guinness family, and my father had said, and did you have to pick a poor relative? And then this time said felt called, and he was going to go into the Church of England. And my mother went completely hysterical again. And I thought, this is odd. This is, she's had so much of this. Why again? And she suddenly said, who knows? One day I could be mother-in-law to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I thought, thank you, God, they've got it at last. They're prepared to live with it. And that was just amazing. I mean, we had Joel by then, our firstborn. And she was a grandma. And a Jewish grandma, you can't separate her from the babes.
Oh. Hey folks, Simon Gilbo here in Burundi, and I've just spent an amazing trip seeing the incredible work that's going on in the harshest of circumstances. Burundi is still right at the bottom of the pile in terms of being statistically the hungriest country in the world, one of the poorest, and yet some of God's best troops are in Burundi. What's amazing is that we have some very generous funders who've been willing to contribute 200 grand to be matched if you want to double your money in terms of impact. The reason we all the more need to double our money is that there's been massive food inflation this year, cost of living, and people are really struggling to live. They're struggling to send their kids to school. They're struggling to eat more than one meal a day. I cannot imagine being confronted with that circumstance, that situation. So I would just plead with you, think of that prostitute that's only gone into prostitution because she's got to feed her kids, or these street kids that we're getting off the street and they're getting educated, or the orphan, or people that have come out of Islam that have lost everything. We've met them even this week, that have been kicked out of their family, lost their kids. And we can get behind them and bless them and fill them with hope. People have wept this week with us in general as they've shared their concerns. So double your money at the link below. Give us either a one-off or in general monthly would be superb, so that we can continue impacting what we reckon was just under 1 million lives meaningfully impacted in the last 12 months. We want to ramp things up. Would you help us? Link below. Go for it. So tell us a bit about living in a mining town during the miners' strike. So that's not an average season of English history, is it? It was tough days.
They were. I mean, when I first saw Normanton in West Yorkshire, I was sitting on a swing next to this sort of park area in a huge council estate. And as I looked down, there was dog mess and there was broken glass. And there was litter everywhere, and the chimneys were belching black, and everything you touched left black on your hands. And I just said, oh God, I can't live here. I can't come here. And he said, yes, you can. You said you'd go anywhere. Come here and trust your children to me. I'll provide for them. And eventually I wrote a book called Promised Land about Normanton, and that will tell you a little bit about what happened over there. They were the most wonderful people I've ever met. They were an amazing community. Just a couple of stories, because it was so extraordinary the time there. My career had begun to open in terms of doing media, and I was going away speaking here and there. And I had 2 little ones by then. And I really needed help. And the phone went one day and somebody said, look, we've got a young Austrian girl and she would really like to be an au pair. Can you take her in? And I said, we haven't got enough money. I mean, we were on family income supplement. And they said, it's all cared for, all accounted for. Christians are paying for it. But she isn't. She's not a Christian at the moment. It's fine. So she arrives, she flies in, and I didn't know her father was in charge of the ski slopes in Austria. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how she has been brought up and how she's lived. And here she is in this filthy mining town. And I said to her, it's all right, we've got a mountain. She looks out the kitchen window and it's black. It's a slag heap. It was filthy and her face fell. And I thought, she's going to be on the next plane back to Austria. The extraordinary thing was that she was so loved by that community. They took her to their hearts and they made her laugh and they teased her. And by the time she did go back, not only had she given her life to Christ, because she loved these people so much, she wept all the way to the airport at having to say goodbye to them. And I learnt then, see how those Christians love one another. If that's what you offer people, that is irresistible. And then during the strike, and she had left by the strike, but we saw so many amazing things, a couple of things. There was one family of 4 children in the church, 2 families of 4 daughters. And one of the family with the younger daughters, she said, I can't send the children to school. This was during the strike. And it was freezing that winter. I do remember that. She said, I've no coats for them. They don't fit. I can't find coats that fit. And I haven't got shoes for them. And I can't send them to school. I can't send them out because I've nothing for them. Now, another family with 4 daughters in the church heard about that. And this woman trotted round and she brought 4 coats that all fitted the girls perfectly. But this was the amazing thing. Each little girl had prayed for a coat in a certain colour, and each of the girls got the colour they prayed for.
Beautiful.
What a God, eh? Who cares, who hears the prayers of a child.
Yeah.
It was just, and then there was another occasion. I'm taking communion in the church, and I look up, and there are 3 men waiting for the bread and wine at the front. Backs to me, obviously. And I look and I think, oh, heck. There's a striking miner. There's a policeman who goes on picket duty. And there's someone who's lost his fish and chip business because he's gone out of business because nobody's got any money. And these 3 are all standing next to each other at the front. And I thought, oh boy, what's going to happen now? And the next thing I look up and I see their arms go out and go around each other. And I thought, in ordinary terms, they would be, well, you can only just begin to imagine how they treat each other. But in that situation, because of their love for each other, they could stand together and take the bread and wine, which blew me away. I just sat and cried. I howled that day just looking at them because they were going through so much, and we took parcels, we took packages. And the amazing thing was the church just grew and grew. And grew. And there began to be stories in the press about these amazing churches that were growing and growing during the strike. It wasn't all bad. It was hard. It was tough. And we wept for them when they went on a pride march when they knew they had to go back. And they'd been let down. They were let down by their own union as well as by the government. I mean, Thatcher had no love for them and didn't understand she was destroying one of the most precious communities. When we used to go carol singing, we'd stand outside somebody's house and it'd be an elderly person and a window would go up next door and they'd say, we got a key, love, because we look after her, so come and get the key and we'll let you in and you can sing to her. And it was like that. And children who had special needs, if they wandered, they were looked after by everybody in the town. And I thought, we don't understand what we're destroying. But if we can build
Yeah.
that in the church, and we worked very hard to do that, and that still exists.
Mm.
So that was wonderful. So, and all that I learned working on the streets in Manchester suddenly became relevant.
Yeah.
You know, nothing is in vain. I've always said to
That's
people,
right.
nothing is wasted. Nothing with God is wasted.
So good how he weaves the tapestry of our lives, isn't it? So good to hear all those stories. Now, you've written and spoken a lot about your passion to see the church embrace the Jewish roots it's lost. Why do you think it's so important? What do we gain by that?
I think I always felt slightly at odds with the church, whatever denomination. I felt I didn't fit. I mean, here I am. I was a sort of Gobby Jewish Geordie. I just kind of didn't fit. And I missed, isn't it interesting? I terribly missed some of the good things about my Jewish background. The festivals and the celebrations. And when I read about Jesus, he just was so Jewish in my eyes. And I thought, what are we missing here? What happened to the church? And I began to read that up and research it and discover that the extraordinary story about how up to about the 4th century, the church was Jewish. Along comes Constantine, the Roman emperor, and he says he's become a Christian and he's going to Christianize the whole of his empire. Nobody knows for sure whether he actually was, but he sets up this Council of Nicaea. And at this council, they say things like, if anybody celebrates any of the Jewish festivals, they can be excommunicated. They move the Sabbath day to Sunday, the day of the sun, away from Saturday. They do that so that Jewish people as well can't fast. Then there were several other things that they brought in that were so anti-Jewish. You couldn't celebrate a Passover anymore. It had no relevance. And it was all because he didn't like, I mean, it was anti-Semitism right from the very start. He didn't like the Jews. They were always a pain for him. And he wanted Christianity not to reflect Judaism at all. And from then on, the church became more and more dominated by Gentiles. And they lost any sense of their Jewishness and any sense of identity with the Jewishness of Jesus. Jesus became very much, you know, a white, you know, pleasant Gentile, really, lacking the fire of Judaism in his bones. And you read he's a storyteller, he's a rabbi, he's totally integrated sacred and secular in his life. He's blessing one minute, he's healing one minute. All of his life, his senses are engaged, all of the senses: smell, sight, what he sees, what he hears. And he's continually saying to the disciples, open your eyes. What do you see? What do you sense? What do you smell? Look at that look at that agriculture. Look at what he's doing. Look at that, you know, and he's telling stories of the prodigal son. It's very hard to realize that he never existed except in Jesus' imagination, but it's so real. He'd seen them somewhere. He'd seen prodigal sons. He had a woman pour scent on his feet and his head and said, what do you smell? You know, she's prepared me for burial. All the time he's engaging with his senses, and he's engaging all the time with symbolism. Everything becomes a symbol. Everything that he sees reflects something else. And he tries to get the disciples to do that. Continually saying, open your eyes, for goodness sake, and I thought, we go around with our eyes shut. And sometimes our Christian faith is not engaged with the everyday and the ordinary. Everything can become a symbol. And everything that we see suddenly, I mean, for him, there was what? Bread, wine, fish, water, sowing seeds, brushes, brooms, jewels. And you can go on and on and on. Very ordinary daytime things. The story of the woman who has a lost coin. That coin was probably part of a necklace that formed her dowry and meant so much to her. And he'd seen that. He must have seen a woman. You know, it's like when you're a woman, if you lose your engagement ring. I mean, if you drop it down the sink, you've got your hand up the plumbing and everything to get it out. And he's trying to get us to understand the quality of his love, the absurdity of his love. You know, he loves where most people would say, oh, yuck. You don't want to spend time with them. And we miss all of that because we don't catch the symbolism of it, and we don't catch the senses, and we don't catch the ordinariness turned into something holy and something special. And I have this passion to try and get the church to wake up to a faith that was engaged in all the little things we do every day. The Jewish sages of old said, you are a really holy person if you can find blessings for 100 things a day. Because the Jews have a blessing for before you eat, after you eat, before you eat fruit from the vine, before you drink wine, there's a blessing for seeing a rainbow, for seeing a beautiful woman, for sneezing, for coming home from work. You put your hand on the mezuzah, which is the scroll of the law on the door, and you say, thank you, I'm home safely, Lord. If you can find 100 of those things, you really are becoming a spiritual being. And I wanted to learn that kind of spirituality, not for it to be a Sunday morning thing, but an everyday thing, engaged in every part of my life.
That's right.
And I wanted to see the celebration coming back into the church, dancing for sheer joy, singing until our heads were coming off, not afraid to show our emotions. He showed his emotions. He wept. He laughed, Jesus.
Yeah.
He had a wonderful sense of humour. I mean, some of his stories are just so downright funny. And you think to yourself, no. And you can imagine the disciples having a real laugh.
So at the moment, as you're talking, I am picturing you in general as a vicar's wife, probably helping which you are anyway, helping the congregation. But actually, you've got a full-on career going on, haven't you? You're in the media. You haven't really talked about that at all. What did it look like? And then you moved on to the National Health Service. So what did that look? How do you integrate all these different parts of your life?
I just want to say before, because we've been to Normanton, to the mining town, the last thing we did before we left was a Passover. That was the first one we ever did. And ITV decided to come out and film it. It was utterly amazing. And we've had an amazing time with Jewish Passovers. On one occasion, we had 18 mainland Chinese came. And at the end of it, one of them came to Peter and said, we would all like to know what is your basement. Oh, the basis of my faith. And they said, yes. And we've seen these amazing things happen at Passover. But yes, ITV. I had been working for ITV. That was a remarkable experience too. I started in Normanton writing the stories of the strike and recording them for BBC Local Radio. And somehow, somewhere, Radio 2 picked it up. And they rang me and asked if I would do Pause for Thought once a week and tell these stories about the strike and about the miners. And at that time, the morning programme on Radio 2 was presented by a man called Derek Jameson, who'd been editor of the News of the World and was a toughie. And I knew if I could get through to him, I could get through to anybody probably. And I was really scared. But first of all, he'd been brought up in the East End of London and loved Jews. And second of all, he just loved storytelling. And he loved the stories I told. And we developed quite a friendship. And he said one day, Michele, you could even convert me. Which is a bit extraordinary. But during that time, I wrote a book about the Guinnesses. I realised, actually, I was working for Central Television as a researcher at the time. They took me on and I made quite a number of documentary programmes with them, one of which won a Sanford St Martin Award, which is the biggie in religious television. And that was on the compassionate friends, parents who lose their children. And I have to say, it wasn't down to me, though I wrote the script and did all the interviews. That was their stories, these amazing Christians who coped with the loss of a child, sometimes through murder or they're taking their own lives. And they were just terrific. And it moved me to tears day in, day out when we were filming. But I realised Central Television was going to come to a close. Granada was buying up all the local television stations and we were going to have one ITV with less local programming. Mm-hmm. I didn't know really what to do. And one night in the bath, I said, do you know, I really enjoy interviewing people. So can I do that day in, day out? And I left it at that. Didn't think anything of it. Anyway, I'm doing this Pause for Thought with Jameson, and the Guinness book comes out, and Ernest Saunders, who is charged with insider dealing and ended up in prison, he's not in prison just yet, but he stops all publicity and he threatens the BBC that if they have me on at all, he will have me drummed out. and he will sue them. And they were scared. And so that happened. And Jameson was furious. And he said, look, I do a chat show on Sky. Will you come on that and talk about Guinnesses and talk about, your books and things? So I did. And the very next morning, there's a call on my phone. And there's a man who says to me, did you know we're opening a new BBC local radio station in Coventry, which is where I was living at the time? We'd moved out of Normanton by then, obviously. And he says, I've got to find 5 daytime presenters. I've got 4 of them. And the other one's got to be a woman because they're all man. And we think it's you, me and my deputy. So I ended up doing with my own local radio show, which was very funny because somebody in the church had come up to me and said, we don't mind having a vicar's wife who goes out to work, but we just wish you did something useful.
Deary me.
No, not all this glamorous stuff. So then I get the job in local radio, and of course they can all hear what I'm doing every day, and they all decide it's wonderful because, I have so many opportunities to bring people they love onto the programme, to bring Christians onto the programme, to bring faith on, and nobody bats an eyelid. They give me complete freedom to do as I choose. And I had such fun.
Brilliant.
And then at the end of those 2 years in Coventry, we got a new station manager. There was skullduggery going on at the BBC behind the scenes, and he had been given a brief to close us down. And so I walk in for my initial meeting with him, and he says, when can you go? So the job had gone, and it happened to a lot of my colleagues, nearly all of us, and it was a shock. And I walked out, and almost immediately I thought, I've got 2 options here. I can either scream and yell and stamp my feet and make a fuss, or call him names, or I can take this from God's hand and say, you're closing this door, Lord. What you going to open? And the amazing thing was, in fact, friends of ours, we had a cell group. There were 7 of us who met regularly and prayed together and worshipped together. And they said, we've got in our minds this idea of the next church you should go to, they said to Peter and me. It's going to be city centre, back up in the north, because you want to go north, don't you, again? We said, yeah, because the north tends not to be as well endowed with ministry as the south. Right, and so it's going to have a lot of young people, so you need a university there. So we said, well, we can't manufacture something like that. But within a week of my having to leave the radio station, there was this job advertised in the Church Times, which was St Thomas's in Lancaster, St T's as it's known, big university town and growing. And because I had lost my job, Peter felt free to go for it. He wouldn't have done if I'd been working still at the BBC. So one door closed and another opened. It hasn't always been like that, but in that situation it was. And we went to a church where it was a wonderful church. People were wonderful, but it also had a lot of problems. I mean, Peter unearthed a fraud of 60 grand going on in the church within the first month. So it was hard. And I had been taken away from the media. Where in Lancaster was there any media? I did get some work with Granada Television, and I made a series called Test of Faith, meeting amazing Christians with fabulous stories to tell. But I needed something more full-time. And I got a call one day and a lady said, I'm trying to build a children's hospice in Preston, and your name keeps coming up as somebody who would help us with some publicity and raise some money. Out of the blue. And so I moved and started working for this children's hospice. And I met a lot of the children she wanted to provide a hospice for in the early days so I could do their stories. There is something about being face to face with a child you know hasn't got long to live.
Yeah.
You watch every smile, you watch every gesture, you look out for every emotion on their faces. And it was a wonderful time. I mean, I'm just amazed at how much we never stop learning. And after 2 years, the money was there and they decided they'd have a big turf cutting ceremony. And I said, I want somebody really special to cut the turf. Who can I get to cut the turf? I thought, and I remembered in Liverpool, Knotty Ash, there lived a man called Ken Dodd. And I thought, no chance, mate. And I wrote to his agent, and he answered, Ken Dodd answered himself and said, I'm coming. And
Brilliant.
it was, he was a wonderful Christian man. We shared stories of faith, he and his wife. And he did this sort of charity work because he loved it, because I felt that was part of his calling. And, I'll never forget him coming out, rubbing his hair up with his tickling stick. And the children just went wild. And it was such a special, and it was the end really for me. I knew there must be something more now that I'm meant to be doing. And again, it's weird. I've never at that stage interviewed for a job. And I was in hospital having some minor surgery, and it was on a Good Friday. And there was nobody in. I was the only patient on the ward, and yet all the nursing staff were in. They were bored out of their minds. So I said to Abby, I rang Abby at home, and I said, Abby, go to the local shop, bring us a few bags of hot cross buns and come down, bring them. So she did. And the nurses all gathered round my bed because they kept saying to me, could you have a fit of hysteria? We're so bored. Give us something to do. They all came round the bed and got coffee and tea. And they said, what do you do? And I told them about Darien House. And they said, we need somebody in the NHS to come and do that for us.
Wow. That's how it happened.
Well, it was amazing. A couple of days later, there's the most gorgeous young woman standing at the foot of my bed. And she says, I've just been asked to be in chair of Preston Hospitals Trust. Will you come and work with me? And get us some good stories and make people confident in the NHS again. So I did. And I had 2 years with Preston Hospitals. Then I moved to Blackpool, the most depressed and deprived town in the whole of England. And it was such a challenge. AIDS was beginning to happen. Big gay community there. Huge homelessness. Huge mental health issues because people go there because they've been happy there as a child and think they'll find happiness and don't. 1.5 million tourists. And I have to get health messages out there. And I loved every minute of it, but it was heartbreaking, the people I met. But again, I felt I'd been prepared to be there and to do this job. And also it was great, of course, at lunchtime to have an ice cream on the front.
Promenade.
And so I transformed all the way patient information was written. And I worked quite a lot with centres that were trying to help kids avoid AIDS. I had to get AIDS messages out there. And I did think, oh God, this is such a privilege. Such a privilege. And then one day, Peter saw in the papers, the government had set up a brand new organisation called Strategic Health Authorities. And they were looking for people to cover communications for the whole of the county and beyond. So they were looking for somebody for the NHS to be head of communications for the whole of Lancashire and Cumbria. And he said, go for it. And I said, not in your life. I can't do that. At 30, I'd be in charge of 30 NHS communications managers. I don't know whether I can. And he said, at least go for the interview. So I go for the interview. And there are quite a few of us being interviewed. And I thought, phew, I'm not going to get it. The chair says to me, how will you teach our staff to communicate better? Those were the days when communications was high on the NHS agenda. And I pray daily it'll be restored to that again. And I just said, well, I'll tell him a story. It's an Alan Bennett story. He said he went into a hospital in London and he needed an X-ray. He asked the person on the desk where X-ray was. And she just said, over there, without even looking up at him. And he wanted to get hold of her by the scruff of the neck and shake her and say, you are as important to patients in this hospital as any consultant or any nurse, simply by being nice. So be nice, you cow. But I said this. I thought, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to get the job. And I looked up and the chair was laughing. And I thought, it's fatal. And it was an amazing job. And just one particular story that just came back to me earlier that I'd forgotten. I had a lady called Bev who came to something we organised at the church, and we'd had mince pies and mulled wine. And she said, oh, I'd love to belong to a community like this. And I went back in January and I was at her desk for something, and she said to me, "Do you do Alpha at your church?" I said, "Yeah, we do." She said, "Can I do it?"
Brilliant.
Then another time I'm at the photocopier. This was extraordinary. I'm at the photocopier, which is where the girls gather for a chat, basically. And the boss's secretary comes up to me and she says, "I had a dream last night. It was an extraordinary dream." She said, "I met Jesus." And she said, and this is what he said. And she recounted to me the whole of the Sermon on the Mount. I could not have done that.
Wow.
She said, "Was it Jesus?" And I said, "I think so." She said, "What does he want of me?" And I said, "Your life." So that was two of them. So Bev, who was the first one who became a Christian, said, "Look," she said, "the Muslims are all going out to prayers on a Friday afternoon. Why aren't we praying together?" So we started. There were quite a few of us. I had to go and tell the chief exec what we wanted to do, and he kind of, "What?" But things began to happen there. You know, we had conversations like the one I've just described. And then when the government closed the Strategic Health Authority down, we had a big party, farewell party. We're all sitting round at a table eating good food. They left an open mic for anybody who wanted to go and say goodbye officially. And a young woman who's in our group, she got up and she walked to the mic and she just sat. She had the most amazing voice. She sang Amazing Grace.
Oh, yeah.
And you could have heard a pin drop, and there were tears. And as she walked back to her seat, she just came over to me and kissed me on the cheek. And I just thought, this is just amazing, you know, in the workplace to have opportunities like that.
Yeah.
Hi Simon. A few months ago, I was made redundant and set myself up as a self-employed cleaner. A friend suggested I plug into podcasts, and that's how I discovered Inspired. These incredible, honest stories transported me into another world as I cleaned, and I love them. I realised over time my faith and expectations increased, and I started to believe and realise it's never too late and you're never too old to do something. So my cleaning career has taken a U-turn. I'm now working for Mercy Ships UK on their recruitment team. I started this week and I couldn't be happier. Obviously God has threaded it all together, but Inspired genuinely played a part in that. And the podcast often challenged me with people's financial generosity. And so in my first week, I've sent a little something as a thank you to support the work in Burundi that you care so much about.
Oh, Michele, I could listen to you all day. Listen, we're running out of time. Tell us a bit quickly. You're now retired in France. It's amazing how you got hold of your house. And I also want to hear about the fact that you're living with chronic pain. So go for it.
The house in France, the story of that was just amazing, really, because we didn't know where to go. France is a big place. And we went to La Rochelle because it was what we knew, and realised quickly we couldn't afford a house there, even though we'd been lent money. And I had seen in a catalogue that we picked up at La Rochelle Airport, a little house with a lake, and I knew Peter loved water. And I'm reading in the Old Testament, I read a bit every day, the story of Aksa. Now, she is the daughter of Caleb, the spy, who said, yes, let's go for it. He's a man of faith. And he says, whoever takes Kiryat Zephyr, the land around here, I'll give him my daughter in marriage. And she's a clever cookie, and she asks for a field because she knows she'll need water. And she asks for 2 springs. And, it's Othniel who takes the land, and she demands these springs from her father. And I said to Peter, this is ringing a bell with me, and I don't know what this is about. But the next morning, didn't know the whole story is repeated in the next book. And I shouted through to Peter, I'm sitting in our bed, and he's in the sitting room, and I said, there's something about these springs. And he said, I thought the bed was very comfortable. And I said, no, it's the water. And what's that all about? Anyway, we rang. The house was still available. The estate agent takes us there. As we drive in, there's a little lake, and he says, look, your farmer has mowed all round it. There's a green bit at the top and a green bit at the bottom. That's where the top spring goes in and the lower spring goes out.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I need confirmation of that, Lord. And Kiryat Zephyr, the area is Kiryat Zephyr. Now, we had travelled to our nearest big town just to have a look, and there's a huge supermarket, which will be ours, and it's where the shops are. And it's called Memorial. And as we drive in, there's a banner over the town that says City of the Book. So I get back and I'm thinking, Kiryat Zephyr, Kiryat, what is it? Where, my Hebrew, where's it gone? What does it mean? And I remember Kiryat is city, and Zephyr, Sefer Torah, the first 5 books of the law. It's city of the book.
So good.
So that was our house. And we have a wonderful event every month, open house in our home, for fun and for prayer and for English food, and lots of French people come. And we call it Deux Sources, 2 springs. Our relationship with God and our relationship with each other.
Yes. Oh, praise the Lord. Okay, quickly. I think this is really important. I want you to touch on your health stuff, because that's a reality of many people, and how you cling to hope and how you still live at a place of joy. Go for it.
Yeah. Life is wonderful. And I'm thankful for every moment I've been given. But there are things that are difficult too. And about 20 years ago, I began to get episodes of extraordinary pain, right up from my back across my head, going on one side, stabbing pain, and then the other side. And they would last 3 or 4 weeks. And I'd never experienced anything like it. It was like an axe being driven into my head. Nobody knew what it was, couldn't diagnose. And then after one episode about 12 years ago, part of it stayed in my back. So even as I'm speaking to you now, there is, just, a sort of feeling as if a screwdriver's being driven into it. And I live with that most of the time, nearly all the time, in fact. And I've had to say, Lord, what is this? And why don't you heal me? He hasn't yet. The big head episodes seem to have abated a lot. But I had read stories of the great women of faith. And people like Fanny Crosby, who was blind and said, visions, blessed assurance, visions of rapture burst on my sight. And she was blind, for goodness sake. And Annie Johnson Flint, who wrote Lean Hard, lean on the promises of God. They had to hold up her hand with a piece of chalk in it. They brought a blackboard in, and she was lying on her back, and she wrote, when we've exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength fails, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. And I thought, if they can do it, Lord, I can too. I can live for you. And it is hard. And one of the things that's helped me enormously is this whole business, the Jewish thing of looking for the ordinary, finding wonder and finding joy in the most simple thing around me, and fastening on that. Because Richard Rohr said, if you don't transmute pain, you will transmit it. And I do not want to transmit my pain to others if I can help it. 1 or 2 are wonderful. They know and they pray. They see. But the majority don't need to know, really. And I just get on. And sometimes it's the smallest things. I learned that with the smiles of the children in Darien House in Preston. Just look for it. It's there. And when I look back at some of the best moments, I don't think of the pain. I don't remember that. I remember that sense of wonder. God did that. God made that. God is there in that moment, in that beauty, in that special thing, in my husband's love, massaging my back at 5 a.m. when I've woken him up. The people who have just got alongside me and cared for me and pray regularly. So many in our church, little old ladies passed over in this age of ageism, who tell me they pray every day for me. And so I will live with it as long as God allows it to be there, and trust that he eventually will take it away one day. There's a wonderful poem by George Herbert that says one day he will look us out of pain. And that I live with. Lord, your look is enough for me.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful. So we do need to finish. You've blessed us massively, Michele. Thank you so much. Just a last word, anything, how can we bless you? Can we buy your books? What would you want to promote? Go for it.
There are 14 of them. I think there are only about 5 in print still. If people want to know more about following their Jewish roots and having Passovers at home, the Heavenly Party that we'll celebrate with the Lord in heaven one day. And then my story is in Chosen. How all that's happened up to a certain point. And then there's Archbishop, which was my only novel, about the first female Archbishop of Canterbury. And now we've got her. I can't say it was prophetic. I mean, it was inevitable, wasn't it? But I hope she isn't. I hope she isn't shafted like mine. But it's a thriller. It's a thriller anyway. And then there's the story of Grace, Peter's grandmother, who was a remarkable woman. And finally, I've just got a new book out, reprinted on the Guinnesses, to combat the Netflix House of Guinness series, which was so full of untruth.
Right.
And so many Christians who are being their testimony negated. I just wanted to set the record straight and tell their amazing story.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put all that in the blurb. And Michele, we cheer you on. And through your writing, through your speaking, communicating, I'm so grateful that your testimony's gone out through us and will bless many people. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Simon. I mean, it just blows me away. I mean, at my age too, I think, I'm going to hang up my harp.
There's still life in the old dog yet. I've not called.
What was it? Who said? The best tunes are played on the oldest fiddle.
Oh, well, you played a beautiful tune. Wonderful. Listen, folks, give us a great review on Spotify, iTunes. That'd be a help because just more, algorithm stuff works its magic, so more people get to see it. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandwin for the mixing. Please share this podcast with people who you know will be ministered to. I'm quite sure there's so much gold in there for lots of people to hear. And next week, a very different guest. They're all so different, aren't they? And so edifying in their respective ways. But in the meantime, you have a good week. God bless you, and toodaloo.